Hello and welcome to the second session of the Let's Talk About Alternative Methodologies series. This session focuses on how to strengthen your use of cost data for subsidy rate setting. My name is Heather Madison, and I am from the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. We are happy to bring this series to you in collaboration with the Office of Child Care and the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance. Our presenters and guests will introduce themselves as we go along, but first, a few housekeeping items. This call is being recorded and will be made available to anyone not able to participate today. As participants, you are able to turn on your video and unmute yourself. However, we do ask that you remain on mute until those opportunities where you can unmute to ask a question. Please use the chat to ask questions and make comments throughout the session. We will be collecting questions and answering them throughout the webinar. If you are not able to use the chat to ask a question, as I said, we will have opportunities for you to come off mute to ask your question. If you require technical assistance during the webinar, you can contact Teresa Campisi through the chat or email her at tcampisi@wrma.com, and I will put that email into the chat in a minute. You can turn on closed captioning at any point to assist you. This is the second in an ongoing series of conversations about cost-based alternative methodologies. We hope this series will support you in use of cost data. In the first webinar of the series, we spoke about why using cost data matters, what is an alternative methodology, and approaches to gathering cost data. We also heard from New Mexico and Virginia about their experience using cost-based alternative methodology. We broke into small groups so participants could talk about their experiences and questions about using cost data. That session recording will be available soon. Based on feedback from that first session, in this session, we'll be listening into the conversation with Arizona and North Carolina about their use of cost data. We will not be breaking into small groups. However, you are welcome to participate by asking questions. And you can do that through the chat, or at certain opportunities, we will allow you to unmute yourself to ask those questions. We will continue to improve this series to ensure it meets your needs. And at the conclusion of the webinar, you will receive a link for an evaluation. We encourage you to complete the evaluation and let us know what worked and what can be improved in this series, along with any questions or topics you would like us to explore. As you can see from the agenda, we will start today with a presentation about policy from the Office of Child Care. We will then talk about using cost data and hear from Arizona and North Carolina about their use of cost data. We will then hear about preparing to gather the cost information and listen again to Arizona and North Carolina share about their experiences. As I said, you're welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Megan Campbell, Child Care Policy Supervisor at the Office of Child Care.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Campbell. I'm the Child Care Policy Supervisor in the Policy Data and Planning Division in the Office of Child Care. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Rebecca Shaw and Marissa Marin, to help moderate the chat and keep track of questions. Today, I'm just going to take a few minutes to do a policy overview as a reminder for you all about the requirements and options for using cost of providing care and alternative methodologies to set payment rates. I'm hoping this session will address a lot of the questions we've heard before, but if you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of my set of slides. There may be time to raise your hand and unmute for a question, but I strongly encourage you to put your question into the chat. Next slide, please. So the Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, requires states to set payment rates for providers that allow families participating in CCDF to have equal access to child care as families who do not receive subsidies. This is a long-standing tenet of the CCDF program, and I'm sure you are all familiar with it. Historically, payment rates have been set using the price that child care providers charge private pay families that is reported through market rate surveys. However, the price of childcare is dictated by what parents are able to afford, not the true cost of providing care. which is higher than what most parents and families can pay. So setting payment rates solely based on market prices often means a large gap between the payment rate and the cost of providing care. This broken market system undermines provider stability, dampens supply, and constrains childcare wages and can make it high quality care out of reach for many families, especially families participating in the CCDF program. This disconnect between the price of childcare for families and the cost of providing childcare is one reason OCC has been highlighting requirements around using the cost of providing care in setting rates and encouraging moving to cost-based alternative methodologies. Next slide, please. Several changes were made in the 2014 reauthorization of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act and the 2016 final rule for CCDF to better incorporate the cost of providing care into rate setting. So this has been an ongoing evolution for several years. The first is that lead agencies are required to consider the cost to providers of meeting basic health, safety, quality, and staffing requirements, like staff-child ratios and group size, and higher quality care at each level of quality, as determined by the lead agency. So if a provider has to meet a 4-star rating in their QRIS, you take into account the cost of meeting that 4-star rating. So even if you're using market prices to set your payment rates, you still have to collect data on cost of providing care and consider that data when setting rates. While taking cost into account when setting rates is not optional, lead agencies do have a couple options for the method they use to set their payment rates. The more common method, which has been in place for many years, is through a market rate survey. Lead agencies use the price data collected through a market rate survey to set rates at a certain percentile of those market rates and report that back to us at OCC through the CCDF plans. OCC has set a benchmark of the 75th percentile as providing equal access. Lead agencies do not have to get pre-approval from ACF in order to set their rates using a market rate survey. The other option is an alternative methodology, and OCC has encouraged lead agencies to move to using cost-based alternative methodologies to set payment rates. Unlike with market rate surveys, if a lead agency plans to only base their rates on the cost-based alternative methodology, the lead agency must get pre-approval from ACF before embarking on their alternative methodology. I'll talk more about the pre-approval process in a couple slides. OCC doesn't currently have a benchmark for what level a state must set their rates using cost in order to be considered equal access. In other words, we do not have an equivalent of the 75th percentile when it comes to setting rates through an alternative methodology. However, lead agencies that use cost-based alternative methodologies are not required to set their rates at 100% of the cost. We get this question a lot, so I want to be clear. If you're using cost of providing care to set your payment rates, it's okay to set your rates at a percent of the cost of providing care that's lower than 100% of that cost, as long as it provides equal access. And as a reminder, because lead agencies are required to take cost of providing care into account when setting rates, including any relevant variation by geographic location, category of provider, or age of child, lead agencies must complete a narrow cost analysis to determine the gap between the cost of providing care and the payment rate, regardless of whether they do a market rate survey or an alternative methodology. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, lead agencies must do a narrow cost analysis, but there's a lot of flexibility in determining the approach and methodology for the narrow cost analysis, and lead agencies may use existing information and data to help limit the burden. Or you could choose to do a more extensive cost study or cost survey or cost model to go with your market rate survey. Cost-based alternative methodologies are more extensive and must be statistically valid and reliable. So even if you're doing a cost-based alternative methodology, you'll still need to technically complete a narrow cost analysis. This doesn't have to be a separate cost study or a whole separate survey, but the methodology must incorporate the required components of a narrow cost analysis. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone of how to request pre-approval to do an alternative methodology. All pre-approval requests must be submitted through your OCC regional office and cover the 10 criteria outlined in the FY 2022-2024 CCDF state plan preprint. OCC will provide a response within 60 days. Also, I want to reassure you that we don't expect a perfect proposal when you submit it on the first try. We will likely have questions and have some back and forth to make sure we understand your proposed methodology and ensure you are meeting all the requirements, including covering the components that would be part of a narrow cost analysis. And this would happen during that 60-day period. So that's it for my brief slides. Rebecca and Marissa, if there are any questions that we can answer, I am not going to look at the chat because I will get distracted.
Right now, we don't have any questions in the chat, but please, anyone who has a question for Megan, you can enter it into the chat right now, or you can come onto the camera or come off mute and ask your question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's great. So we'll go ahead and thanks everybody so much. I'll turn it back over to Heather, but feel free if you have additional questions on this topic to please send them in. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about goals and what to do with questions you might want to ask before you collect data, and then what are some things that you might want to use your cost data for. So the first is thinking about your goals. When using cost data, it's important to think about where you want to go. Your overall goals may seem difficult to achieve. However, using data can help you identify priority areas that can help you make small steps towards your overall goals. The data can show you a path towards the future. It can help you identify the gaps between what it costs and your current subsidy rates. Those gaps can help you prioritize funding. It can help you define milestones to achieve those goals, and it can help you see where there are inequities in your system. And it can help you identify what policy changes you can make to support your goals. It helps to ask questions before you get started collecting data. It can help you define what data to collect, how to analyze it, and potentially how you can use it. Some questions you may want to consider include, what goals and questions do you have? As I shared in the previous slide, goals help drive your data collection and use. Different people may have different goals. For example, licensing may want to ensure that programs have funds to address licensing standards. Staff working on QRIS may want to ensure programs have funds to meet the highest level of quality. Workforce staff may want to address low wages and compensation. And a parent might have the goal to ensure that your rates cover their specific childcare needs. Where there may be individual goals, those can be integrated into a larger goal and can help with priorities, such as initially you may want to focus on ensuring subsidy rates cover the cost of licensing standards. And then as you achieve that goal, you may want to work towards covering increasing wages and compensation. Another question is, what are the community's needs? Often parents, providers, and policymakers have different understandings, needs, and goals. This can make changes to systems difficult. The data and information you provide can help you communicate with your community the childcare needs and help you come together with the community to have a shared understanding of priorities. Thinking about what data you already have will help you focus on what you might need. So if you already collect data on price or an aspect of cost through another process or survey, consider if that data will meet your needs for a narrow cost analysis or alternative methodology as well. Many lead agencies collect provider rates for the payment process and may not need to collect those rates again from those providers. However, you may still need to collect rates from providers who do not participate in CCDF. Once you know what you do have, you can then identify what data you might be missing. Identifying those gaps helps you focus on what to gather. Remember, data must be within 2 years and must be gathered within the same time frame, usually 3 months or less. And think about how you might use stakeholders at this step. We're going to hear a little bit more about this in a little while, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. And finally, think about what expertise do you have and what you might want to contract or partner with another organization for expertise. Maybe you have access to a data agency that can support with some of the analysis, but you need expertise in representative sampling or surveying. Maybe you want to help with all of it. So those are some questions you might want to ask yourself to start preparing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, once you've collected the data to start answering your questions, that next step is to use the cost data. And how that looks for every lead agency can be different. One thing you must do is identify the gaps between the cost to provide care and the subsidy rates. These gaps will help you understand the biggest needs and prioritize any changes you want to make to the subsidy rates. For example, you may find the cost of providing infant care has the largest gap, and you may prioritize increasing those rates. It is important to go back to the questions you had about your data, and so that you can make sure to answer those. You may find that the lower priced childcare may be in a depressed area, and the cost to provide quality care is unachievable based on the current subsidy rates paid. That would be a gap, and you could prioritize increasing those rates. We recognize that some states and territories may struggle to increase funding, and you may identify some areas where you can make changes that are less expensive and demonstrate the need for more funding. We need everyone to understand that the importance of paying for high quality childcare. The cost data information can help you illustrate the needs and the impacts of changes. It can help you communicate with providers and parents, who can in turn support and communicate the needs of those changes. Childcare providers can be strong allies when they understand the data and your plan for the future. For example, if you find that some current rates cover the costs, for example, school age care, when you use providers as a stakeholder group throughout your data collection process and decision-making, those providers can help, will start understanding why you might prioritize other rates to increase, and they can be your advocates in those increases. And remember, cost data can be used for more than determining the subsidy rates. Cost data can help you understand the impacts of other changes for childcare. For example, you may want to know the financial impact of changes to licensing standards. You can incorporate those costs into your data to determine how much more it would cost providers to implement those changes. Or you may want to support another program, such as grant programs to providers. You can use the cost data to determine how those additional funds might allow providers to pay higher wages. We will hear more about how our guest states have used their cost data in different ways. I'm going to hand this off to Jeannie Mills, Senior Research Associate at the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability.
Thank you, Heather. So I don't need to introduce myself because Heather just did, but I do want our two guests to introduce themselves. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll see who our first presenter will be. Leela, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Hi, yes, good afternoon from the very hot state of Arizona, Phoenix in particular. My name is Leela Wendell, and I'm the Assistant Director here at our Arizona Department of Economic Security, and I oversee our Division of Childcare.
Great, thank you. Next slide. And Ariel, would you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. I'm Ariel Ford. I'm the Director for the Division of Child Development and Early Education in North Carolina's Department of Health and Human Services. Glad to be here.
Great. Thank you both. So I do want to acknowledge how wonderful it is to have your peers willing to chat with you. Ariel is in the midst of having a monitoring visit this week, and so carved out like 5 minutes or 10 minutes yesterday to talk to me. So I understood kind of what's going on in North Carolina. And she has her monitoring team, I think, probably in a room right next door to her. So thank you so much, Ariel. And Leela is at a conference in Phoenix where she said it's going to be 116 degrees today. So, and I've had a couple of conversations with Leela, and the last conversation I said to Heather, my God, somebody that really loves the Rubik's Cube of cost analysis is Leela Wendell. She's just like approaches this with a smile on her face. So anyway, I really appreciate both of the time that both of you and the time you've given us. So I'm going to start this first 15-minute discussion talking about the goals that each of you had for your costs, for using costs for rate setting. And then after this 15-minute discussion around sort of your goals and how you imagined using this information last plan cycle and then going forward, Nina Johnson is going to talk a little bit about data gathering and preparing for that and using stakeholders. And then we'll have another 20 minutes where we'll talk about that with both Ariel and Leela. So let me start with you, Ariel. What motivated you to really consider costs for rate setting?
Oh gosh. So our journey, I would actually say, I'll just back up and say our journey probably started years and years and years ago with an acknowledgement from providers, the advocacy community, the department, that the market rate was inadequate for providing high quality care. So this journey did not start with kind of a contractor doing the work. So there were years of conversations about how the subsidy system as it is wasn't working. Fast forward to the PDG grant, the 3-year cycle that we're finishing now, and we wrote this study, this journey into the PDG grant, and so that's what led us to this point. So I think it's been a priority it's been an acknowledged need for a long time. I would say on the other side of COVID, we are facing a really, as are all of y'all. I mean, I have just started saying we're in free fall. So we have spent all of our stabilization grant funds. We are rapidly burning down our discretionary funds. And so the need to figure out how to manage the public dollars in the private market is more pressing than ever. So while it was necessary before, it's critical now.
Okay. And how about you, Leela? What motivated you?
Gosh, there's so many similarities with what Ariel shared. I think the journey started way before, the last market rate survey. But I'd say in our last market rate survey in Arizona, which we did, well, before the most current one, our market rate survey in 2018, we started to be able to see trends across previous market rate surveys that the price of care wasn't changing a lot, even though we knew costs were going up, and we were hearing, from our childcare providers that there are challenges in meeting just the needs and the costs of operations. So we really wanted to understand what we were hearing anecdotally and to be able to put numbers behind the burden on parents and affordability of care. We were seeing the utilization of our subsidy going down. We believed it was because of the hidden costs of childcare that they were charged from a provider side. So we really wanted to approach a cost of care, cost of quality study to better understand that piece of it. Additionally, for our cost of care, cost of quality study, we partnered with our sister agency, First Things First. They're focused on birth to 5, and they also are the home of our QRIS. So for them, they were trying to understand what is the cost of providing high quality care. And as we heard from Heather and Megan, in order to implement higher quality care, it is expensive. And to provide that, it makes it unaffordable to families, especially families receiving CCDF subsidy. So those were really the motivation. And thankfully, we had support both internally from our department as well as our partnership with our fellow sister agency.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask a little bit more about support in a minute. Both of you plan on conducting a market rate survey for this next plan, but you both are also exploring strengthening your use of cost data for rate setting. Do you have buy-in from your leadership, and as broad as you want to think about leadership in your state? And how are you getting it? And Leela, you mentioned to me when we talked that you had an extensive internal coordination plan because you've got pieces of childcare in different departments. So I'm going to start with you and tell us about that sort of buy-in to moving toward cost and how that's working for you.
Yeah, well, it is so interesting to think back to pre-COVID. There was an increase to our CCDF allotment. I think it was around 2018, maybe 2017. And that really started conversations, I think, at the agency to say, what are we going to do with this additional annual grant award? And we, at the time, had a wait list in place, I think, for 10 plus years. We were able to say, okay, we can release families from the wait list, but what can we do to bring up the reimbursement rates? And so that started, I think, the conversation internally with our finance department. Of course, they're much more comfortable talking about this when they know we have money. And then we started to really engage with our childcare providers. And it was visiting on site, sitting, at their office with them, and like really hearing what their financial and operations journey is like over a year. So, what is the turnover? What is causing it? So there was a lot of partnership building between our department and direct childcare providers. So when it came time to really say, in a more formal space, this is what we're looking to do, and this is why, we had already had a lot of support and buy-in from our childcare providers directly, a lot of our key stakeholders in the early childhood area, as well as our agency partners, because we do have subsidy here in our agency, but we have the licensing and regulation predominantly in another state agency. We also serve and process the referrals for childcare for children in the child welfare system here. So there were a lot of really good partnerships in saying, we want to be able to make childcare affordable for our families. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. And Ariel, I know you've done quite a lot of work with state and state leadership and others. Do you want to tell us about that buy-in for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of started saying some about the coalition building that started years ago. And I would say what we have done since so we're working with a really great contractor, AIR, the American Institute for Research. So for anybody looking for a contractor to help them work on a state alternative market rate, give me a call. But it was incredibly important to us that there was a very kind of grassroots up approach to getting information. And so not just, I think frequently we can get caught in the kind of like, what are the policy levers? What are the communications levers? What are the power levers? And it's not that that's not important, like it's super important, but I think I come from the field. I was a teacher, I was a director, I was technical, I've done the things. And I just really remember, I'm just going to, when I was a teacher and the 12-step diapering process came in, and I was like, have any of these people ever been a 2-year-old teacher? Like this just like functionally doesn't work. And so I feel super, super strongly that if policy doesn't work in the classroom and at the provider level, then it's bad policy. It doesn't matter how much people in Raleigh or DC or wherever, however much we, fawn over the policy, if it's not working for a director in her community, it's bad policy. So we're really starting from grassroots up and engaging providers, families, local administrators of subsidy to make sure that there are not there will be unintended consequences no matter what, but how we can predict some of them and at least build that continuous quality improvement into the system and say, instead of saying kind of, here's our system for the next 35 years, that's really the approach that we're trying to take. So grassroots up and acknowledging the need for the power and comms and all of that. We're also working alongside kind of state and national leaders in the area to bring attention to the need for both an alternative market rate, but also to acknowledge that this is only one part of the financing system and it's pretty insufficient for what we need to do writ large. So we buy about 30% of the childcare market in North Carolina. We have about 70% of families that are still paying their own way. So it's just not going to fix the whole thing. So I think that's probably more than you asked for, but grassroots up first and then grass tops down second would be what I would say.
Okay, great. So I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit about your goals as you embark on gathering cost data this next time. Do you have goals in mind? And I also want you to address trepidation on what you fear you'll find, especially, I mean, I can't imagine, and I've talked to some states that are like, oh no, if we go that way, what are we going to do with, when we find out that we're so far away? So either question, what are your goals going to be, and how do you approach that if you're afraid of what you'll find out? Go ahead, Ariel.
Okay. All right. Something I've been thinking about. So as y'all said, I'm in the middle of OCC monitoring. And so when we're doing our presentation on supply building for underserved populations tomorrow. And one of the things that I'm really struggling with is we're doing the best we can, and it is just not nearly enough. And our system is built that way. So childcare providers have to have a wait list, or they're not financially viable. They only have a few percentage points of attrition before they start having bad debt on the books. The same with our subsidy. If we have to, in North Carolina, the way that we keep a wait list, and if we don't have a wait list, we're not going to spend our money. And there is no way on the face of the planet I'm giving Treasury money back. So, so it's all, the financial modeling for early childhood is built on scarcity, built on somebody not having services. So I think I am coming to kind of a hard kind of personal realization that it is enticing, and kind of it's enticing to want to think that this is the moral high ground, and working with children and families and trying to serve children and families is the moral high ground, and really thinking about the inherent gray of the policy choices that we're being asked to make. So I would say there is trepidation. Somebody is going to be a loser. Our state is not going to put $2 billion or $3 billion into childcare in the next 5 years. I mean, knock on wood, but I don't see that. That's not in the tea leaves. So trepidation is real. If you're not scared, you are lying to yourself. And that's what our job is. That's how democracy works. This isn't going to work if we aren't doing something that's scary. I mean, nobody's winning right now. It's not working right now. So do the scary thing. We will hold hands. Leela and I are right here to hold hands with you. I'm appointed. So yes, I can go away. It's fine. It's fine. We will all have jobs after this job.
Okay, Leela, I know you had some really positive thoughts about this. So do you want to share that?
Yeah, well, I will
I'm glad we're
share.
going to end on a positive note. So.
I will share that it's totally normal to have that trepidation. For us, I think it came when we got some of the initial results of our last cost study. It started to really set in that there are big gaps and there are changes to policy and that would need to be made if we're to implement higher reimbursements. So if we're implementing these reimbursements, how are we ensuring that the investments are getting used the way that we need them to be? So it's been interesting. I'd say for the next round of our market, I'm sorry, we're planning to do, well, we have to do our market rate survey, but we are still going to continue that, of course. And the next cost of quality study, we're going in as system partners, not just state agencies, but providers and key stakeholders to say, do we have an agreed upon quality framework? That has changed since COVID. We also have done a Start with Equity report that's in draft right now with ASU's Children's Equity Project. It highlights, is the system and is Arizona's quality standard, including dual language learners, children with disabilities. So I think inclusion is important. These things are going to take an investment. So the next round of our cost study, we're, I think, also going to be saying, are we meeting the needs of our children and our families? How is that reflected in our quality? How is it then also reflected in what that's going to cost? So that's exciting. I know it's also pretty daunting, but pretty exciting. We also have in our state an out of school time license that's getting created. Right now we have a rule open. We're going through that process with our Department of Health Services. And this is going to be unique because currently our school-age children are cared for in our child care license centers as they exist today, licensed birth through 12 or 13. And so in that case, like, what would it be if a provider is only serving school-age children? So we're going to be looking into that. It will be, you know, during the school year, before and after school care, during summer or other seasonal breaks. So it's going to be interesting to see what we have there. But again, an opportunity to bring strong partners into the system, like our Boys and Girls Club, where they will have, you know, providing out of school time access to children CCDF subsidy eligible. So that isn't currently where we are. So that'll be definitely a focus. And what we hope to do is continue to be able to clarify the story. So with facts, with costs, we're engaging our economic development entities across the state, our business communities. If there's one thing they'll say they understand well, it's dollars and cents. And so it's when we present this information in a way to show, obviously, higher quality, lower ratios, higher personnel costs, looking to improve wages, to reduce turnover. All of this is very familiar language for them. And so, you know, this is what it costs to run a high quality program. This is what you want to keep your workforce, to drive, you know, more business coming into the state. And so we're really excited to also have a lens and probably some additional focus groups around our business community as well.
Okay, great. We've run out of time for this section, but I just want to double check. Heather, is there anything in the chat that we could ask a quick question, or shall we move along and let Nina?
I know Ariel was adding a few thoughts in the chat. I'm not sure if you want to just summarize them a little, Ariel, and then we can move on.
I think a powerful, just quickly, a powerful thing that we've been doing is being really curious and testing our assumptions. So really looking at, is it cheaper in rural communities, or is that we are more comfortable with rural women being poorer, or, you know, it's the same with family childcare homes. So I think that's just be curious about it. And I think, you know, so right now, OCC, just, you know, a little heads up that we might be coming to you and saying, yeah, I think it might be one market. I think there is one market that has different cost drivers, but I think that idea that there's a rural and an urban market might be wrong.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and just to share, I know we're close on time, but in our cost study, we found no difference in the cost of providing care in our urban and rural areas. And in fact, our largest gaps of our reimbursement rates to that cost of care is in our family child care homes. So that's another area where next round.
Okay, I'm going to transition to Nina, and we'll come back with our guests after Nina talks.
Thanks, Jeannie. I'm Nina Johnson with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance.
And I'll talk just briefly about the process of engagement and gathering cost data. So we can move on to the next slide. When we talk about engagement, and I think that Leela and Ariel, you shared some really wonderful examples of who you've engaged, which was super helpful. I think we often default to the term stakeholders, and that term can be vague. So I think it may be helpful to make it less vague and share some examples of the types of people and organizations that you can engage when you're doing this work. So you can engage your state advisory council if you have one. I'd be interested in hearing if you all have done that, and if so, how you felt it worked. You should definitely engage child care center directors, possibly staff, and definitely family child care educators. And then for both family child care and centers, be sure to look beyond the people who typically come to the table. So I'm sure you all hear from many of the same educators, and that's wonderful. But there may be some who don't or feel less comfortable speaking up. And I think those are the ones that would be great to hear from. You can reach providers through provider associations and through CCR&Rs, which can be an excellent partner because they're tied into the provider and sometimes the parent community. And they often have the staffing and expertise to help you reach providers. And you can also reach providers through family child care networks. And those could include staffed family child care networks, but they can also include provider-led networks. So be sure to think about those too. And there may be others. So we're going to put up a poll now, I think, and we're interested in hearing from you about who you've engaged in the process of estimating the cost of care. So I think you can select multiple, and then if there are others that you've engaged that aren't listed here, feel free to share those in the chat. And I can't see the responses coming in. So whoever can see them, just let me know when it looks like we've got enough and can share the results. I think we'll give it a few more seconds to have a few more participants. All right, what does it look like, Heather? Looks like we're at about 20% participation, which might be where we get. Do you want to give it 5 more seconds for everybody to finish up answering the question, and then I'll end the poll? Sure. Yeah, let's see where we are. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And Ariel, thanks for adding those others to the chat. So you added to the chat state and local chambers, the business community, and the Department of Commerce. Yes, super helpful business partners. So it does look like a lot of the people who responded have engaged their state advisory council. Most of you, the large majority, have engaged child care center directors and/or staff and family child care educators, which is wonderful. Some have engaged provider associations, CCR&Rs. About half of you have engaged CCR&Rs. Fewer have engaged family child care networks. And that may just be because you don't have family child care networks in your state. And then another one that was added is the NAUIC affiliate and advocates. That's a great one too. All right, thank you. I think we can move on to the next slide. So again, just in an effort to break down the process of engagement, there are 2 different ways to engage people in this process of cost modeling and gathering cost data. So one is through an advisory group, and the other is engaging providers in data collection. So talking about the advisory group first, you can create an advisory group of providers and other partners like the CCR&R. And that group can serve to ground and inform your entire cost modeling process. So they would be involved from beginning to end. And again, just a note to be sure to reach out beyond the usual providers. And then in the second area, engaging providers in data collection, you just want to be sure you're gathering as much data as you can, obviously, and that the data is as accurate and meaningful as it can be. And you can do that by engaging providers very intentionally and meaningfully. And then on the next slide, the advisory group should be engaged as you plan for data collection. It should be engaged throughout the data collection process.
And then as you model the data and then interpret the results of the data and the modeling, and as you draft and disseminate your report. So for example, the advisory group can help you craft your survey or interview or focus group questions. So you're using meaningful terminology for providers. They can help you understand the data that you've collected, and they can help you clearly communicate what you've learned and think about how to share the information and package it and who to share it with and how to get it out there. And then a larger group of providers, just looking at the second category, should be engaged as you collect data. So whether you're relying on an advisory group, a focus group, a survey, or interviews, be sure to communicate with providers about the purpose of the data collection, and then circle back and communicate with them about how the data was used. So basically just ensure that you have open and clear lines of communication. And then on the next slide, we'll talk about the options for data collection. So there are various ways to collect data for cost modeling, and two general categories. You can use existing data, or you can ask providers about their costs, or you can do a combination of those. So in the category of using existing data, this can include publicly available data sources such as wage data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can use data from prior data collection efforts such as the market price study, workforce studies, data gathered as part of COVID relief funding. Just keep in mind that you may need to adjust some of the values to account for rising costs. You can use administrative data, which is data that you regularly collect. So that might include workforce registries, CCR&R data, licensing data. You can use default values in the provider cost of quality calculator. And then the other category is asking providers about their costs. There are a variety of ways you can do that. So you can have provider focus groups, which represent different regions or different types of care. You can interview providers about their cost. You can survey providers, and you can either survey all or almost the entire population of providers, or survey a smaller subset of providers that ideally would be a representative sample. As I said, you can combine those approaches. So you might start with your existing data and then ask providers to provide input on or edit those values, which makes it a little bit easier for them. So there are various ways you can combine these. And I'm anxious to hear from Ariel and Leela about how they've done this work. So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Jeannie, to continue the conversation with Ariel and Leela.
Okay, thanks, Nina. So I like the distinction between the functions of stakeholders. So one function being around helping you plan, and the other function actually helping you get the data that you need for costs. I'd like to hear from both of you on how you used, and maybe you can reflect back on last year or last plan cycle and going forward, how you've used stakeholders for the planning process. And, you know, what were the advantages and what were the challenges? And Leela, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so in our last cost study, we had our consultant or contractor who's done our market rate surveys for the last couple of iterations. So very well informed on kind of the overall process. So when we started with this cost study, we started with our contractor holding a series of interviews with key stakeholders. So I think this speaks to, you know, what was just presented around, that's a very broad term. And I think there was not only capturing information and perspectives from key stakeholders, but we were able to then come back and have a discussion if there's an area or a stakeholder group where we need to have further conversation. So I think that's a really important way to get to know your stakeholders and get to know if there's areas where identifying focus groups to further understand something that they may be raised or their perspective. So that's something that I think we'll be looking forward to in our next iteration. We also did provider focus groups. So absolutely hearing from providers. And we also sent out some very detailed Excel spreadsheets where we required childcare providers to complete a spreadsheet of their costs by classroom. So that is there's really no shortcut when we're trying to get into those details. So it was a really, really heavy lift. And we only got, I think about a 20%, no, it was less than that. We got a very low response rate on that Excel spreadsheet. But it wasn't concerning in the end because it was just showing some parallels of what we already knew. Costs were highest in personnel costs. They were pretty much the same when it came to like supplies or food. Like that's not what changes significantly over the cost of providing the base care and higher quality care. So I think it gave us enough information to know where we would make assumptions in our cost modeling. And that was extremely helpful. I'd say it's really important to share the data with childcare providers. So those providers who did take hours to complete the spreadsheets, they saw that we implemented increased rates. Of course, through our market rate survey structure, but informed by cost of quality, cost of care. So when we go to them and ask them to do this again, to just make sure that we're understanding the data correctly, I think we're going to have higher participation. So that's a really important part of it.
So while I'm still with you, Ariel, I just want to ask you, do you plan on changing your use of stakeholders in this next plan cycle? Or are you going to do the same thing? You know, what's your plan?
I think, I'll just be super frank. And I think, I don't know if this is different for other people, but we've used the same vendor for as long as we've done cost or market rates. So they will be doing our next market rate study. And I don't think that we will change the process. It's a pretty tried and true process. I think what we have done as an agency overall is, and this is one of the things that I believe in so strongly, and it came from my previous boss, the mayor of Chattanooga. He would say that the moral authority to act comes from listening. And so we really try hard in our agency to listen with our ears and our hearts to what people are telling us. So I think it's not about this one moment, but that we are collecting information every day from providers, from CCR and our consultants, from families. And so there is a much more dynamic, rich sense of community than just, it's not transactional. So I think we're really figuring out how to not be a transactional agency, but acknowledging that we are part of the communities that we're serving. And so that I think might be what is changing more than kind of what's in a scope of work.
What about challenges in using stakeholders? Anything you want to say about the challenges, either of you?
It's worth going slow. It takes a ton of time and energy and effort, and it is 150% worth it. So just don't shortcut yourself. And it is way easier to sell something when you're like, I've talked to 2,500 providers across the state, and 75% of them have told me this. I mean, there's no way that legislators or advocates can really counter that. So when you're working really intentionally with the people most impacted by your policy decisions, I think that's right integrity with the work.
Leela,
Yeah, I'll add that I think there's an opportunity to also expand the conversation beyond, okay, now the Arizona Department of Economic Security needs this much additional funds to meet this need. I think, as Ariel shared, there is a much larger need across the state beyond our agencies. So when we're thinking about how we fund this, I think stakeholders also need to be thinking outside the box, not the traditional paths of maybe advocacy for funding. It's really understanding the economic iterations that have gotten us to this, and working to build that awareness across the different industries and policymakers that need to understand this problem a little better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Heather, you had a follow-up question. Do you want to just ask it?
I can, thank you. Oh, is that the wrong Heather?
No, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Okay, I put mine in the chat. And I see Ariel provided an answer. Yes. Leila, I was wondering if you're primarily testing your PCQC assumptions in collecting those data.
Yeah, so when we're looking at this, and again, I think it brings the conversation this next time of, do we all have a similar understanding of our quality framework? But we did look at our licensed providers with no star rating. So in our program, we have the Quality First program, which is 1 to 5 star rating. So is it a provider just meeting the regular health and safety licensing standards? And then what would it cost to be at a 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star? And again, within that, we saw the difference being our 5 star programs, our programs, first of all, able to achieve 5 stars. We're doing so with extra support in the classrooms. So that's more staff members. They were allowing time for their staff to take training, prepare. So it's those sort of things that of course have a cost. And so those were the differences. So I think I've answered your question.
You did. Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
So let's talk a little bit about your providers as information sharers. I guess, Leela, you referenced the fact that providers, were probably deer in the headlights when they got the Excel spreadsheet. And we all know that, providers in general may not have that data by the age group, by the geography, by the, it can be really challenging to parse out all of that data and give it to you in a way that's useful. Do you feel like you'll change, Leela, how you collect data from providers going forward? Or do you still plan on trying to bring them along with sharing with you their budgets?
Yeah, so our highest response rate was from our child care centers, privately owned, that have, I think, a lot of corporate infrastructure. What our lowest response rate was from our family child care providers. So I think we need to consider a different approach to be able to get that information and make sure that we're accurately understanding what their current experience is.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Ariel? How about your provider group, and how did you gather that data, or how do you plan on gathering it forward?
It's survey. It is survey data primarily, and the other thing we're doing is looking at the component. So we're really, so we're looking at a survey that they let us know the components that they have in their budget, and then we offer other kind of hidden costs, and then a chance for them to write in. So it's survey data. I am really bent recently on, I think, like you talking about the fact that you're kind of in the same place we are, that it's like, okay, rural, urban, there's just different costs, but it's the same. It's the same price tag at the end of the day. I would love for us to get away from thinking that every state has a totally unique, economy. I don't think that's true either. And so I hate that we're creating an administrative burden on providers. And so, listen, I'm giving a long answer to the short thing. What that I'm trying to say is, no, I hope that we don't keep doing it this way, because it's burdensome for providers. And I think that we have so much information collectively that we shouldn't be doing that to them.
Ariel, when I saw what you guys did in your last plan cycle, I found it interesting that you had gathered data that was sort of the basic costs, aspirational cost, kindergarten parity. I think you had 4 different ways that you looked at data, and obviously most of that was related to staffing and costs for staffing. Yes. But then that allowed you to get to sort of select where you wanted to consider cost. Do you plan on doing that this next time around? And Leela, I want to hear about that from you as well.
Yeah, so that's some of the way we're trying to figure out how to look at it from a systems perspective instead of such an individualistic perspective, to say, if we generally know that somewhere between 60 and 80% of the cost of a program is in staffing, and we generally know the education level of staff that we want per star rating, we can make some pretty high level assumptions. And so, I mean, y'all know this, when you're rolling up 5,000 childcare providers and 42,000 teachers, you can kind of, there's some give and take in those numbers. So that's the way we, at least while I'm here, will continue to think about this as more at a systems level.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Leela?
Yeah, so for the next round, I'm really curious to dig in more on our assumptions around personnel, around our staff. So in our cost of quality, cost of care study, we assumed Bureau of Labor Statistic categories. And so there is a generic one that we saw most providers using, that was a standard occupational classification that had a much lower average wage than when you looked at a preschool teacher. So we were saying, okay, well, we need to start understanding and aligning the salaries that we're using in this assumption with our salary scale that we're trying to implement, and we are implementing through an apprenticeship program, as like consistency. And also, I think something that's interesting for our home-based, we were actually using a qualification of a combined like early education teacher and administrator, because they really are doing both the classroom type, hands-on, and the operations of their business. So I really think that they're undervaluing themselves, and therefore, the rates are also impacted by that. So I'm really excited to look into, again, better ways, as Ariel said, where we can use data that's already gathered. We can provide, guidance on how childcare providers can classify their staff so that we can gather this information better than through Excel spreadsheets.
So let's talk a little bit about gathering data that helps you appreciate costs by age group. So if you're talking to teachers, providers that have mixed age groups, did you feel like you got good data that allowed you to sort of calculate what does it cost for infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and tell us a little bit about that. Go ahead, Ariel.
Oh, mixed age groups. I will say that there's not a ton of mixed age in North Carolina. So I would say early Head Start, and then there are a few, some Montessori. Our Montessori primarily are not subsidy providers in North Carolina. Is that the same for you? Okay. And then a few programs, and wow, they have big feelings. So they continue to be very vocal about their needs in a mixed age setting. And in our state, they are beholden to the ratio of the youngest child. So we basically end up using the youngest child in the room as a proxy. They're vocal.
Right. And that's really the same in Arizona. It's definitely something I'm going to write down and make sure that we have a conversation about, but we would see, those mixed ages mostly in our home-based care then. So again, an opportunity to really understand what that means, and how there is a huge gap, and we're probably not going to close that gap right away. I think there's additional technical assistance that we can provide, more supports in really helping to professionalize the home-based care, and supports to help them better collect their data and information as well.
Ariel, I think I recall seeing that your contractor in the last cycle recommended that you align your rates with your staff ratio requirements. Have they been off? Is that what?
Yeah, I don't know the history on how that happened, but in the licensing ratios and the subsidy reimbursement rates are not matched up perfectly, and I have no idea how that came to be. But that seems like a no-brainer. You know, as with everything, what seems like it should be easy is not quite as easy as you would hope it is, but that's definitely something that we recognize as like not a good practice, not a practice I would encourage other people to follow.
So yeah, I bring it up because I've seen that a couple of times in other states, and I think that, yeah, it does seem simple, but remember, I called this all a Rubik's Cube when we were talking about rate setting. So I recognize that.
And I just want to say kind of too, I don't know what Arizona is like, but North Carolina, there is a ton of authority that some CCDF administrators have that the General Assembly assumes in our state. So many things that might feel like should be a policy decision like that are not policy decisions, but legislative decisions. So that just changes the strategy a lot.
Oh, I can imagine. How about for you, Leela?
We have more flexibility than that. So yeah, it's right now, as I mentioned, our Department of Health Services got permission from the governor's office to open rulemaking. So we're looking at not only establishing the out-of-school time license, but other areas to align the state standards to our CCDBG standards. So what Arizona does to achieve the CCDBG standards, we have a provider registration agreement that we have control of within our department. So we're able to make some of those changes because the floor of our standards is pretty low. So it's not great, but we have definitely flexibility where we can assess some of those areas. And as far as rate setting, it has both been monitored and then taken off the monitoring list from a legislative side on whether or not we have to run our rates through our legislators when there are changes.
So both of you have indicated that you would like to, or maybe have aspirations of changing your rate regions. I know in working with North Carolina in the past, you guys had rates for every one of your 100 counties or something like that. Am I right? And then by age group, by star rating. So you had thousands of rates. Am I correct, Ariel?
You are correct. Family child care homes, centers, age, star rating, and individual county. Yes.
So what's your aspiration around that, and how long do you think it'll take if you plan on doing something?
Dare I say, I think we're still deciding. I think, you know, and we're trying to decide what is politically viable, what's kind of policy-wise viable, what is a change management strategy. So like what Ariel Ford on July, whatever, 2023 thinks the end goal should be is probably not what the first step would be. I think what a step we are working toward with the contractor is that regardless of geographic density, so urban, rural, suburban, that there is not a cost difference. There is most definitely a cost difference by age. I mean, babies are just more expensive than 4-year-olds. 5-star programs are just more expensive than 1-star centers. Centers and homes, we are getting to the place that we internally are not sure that there should be a difference in reimbursement rates. I don't know that that's politically viable or policy viable. So I think in a perfect world, I think there would be rates by age and quality rating, period.
Okay. And what about you, Leela? You guys
So North Carolina takes the cake on number of rates. I thought we had so many because we have a similar structure, but we took our 15 counties and instead organized them into 6 districts. But even with that, because of what we learned from our cost study, in our last rate increase, we moved to 1 statewide rate for age and type. So we are paving paving the path of small changes. So we haven't, over the course of, I don't know, 5 or 6 rate increases that we've done over the last couple of years, we've just slowly started to move towards where we want to go. And it helps because I think with each iteration, we're able to explain the change and why, and then people get comfortable with it. And then they're ready for the next dosage of, okay, and now we're moving closer. So we're so thrilled. It was a huge announcement to be able to, move towards statewide rates.
You've set this up perfectly for me, Leela. In talking to both of you, I was impressed by the short-term plans and then the longer-term plans that you have. Can you talk a little bit about it? And you kind of did when you talked about this didn't just start yesterday, it started 10 years ago. So I think it might be helpful to have people understand your vision, shorter term and longer term. Go ahead, Ariel, you can start.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just, this is a sea change. And I think, so there's equally important to the kind of end policy goals is the implementation strategy. And I don't even think our childcare providers are kind of prepared for, and certainly not our agency. I mean, this is going to be giant change. So we're trying to think through what are the most pressing pain points now that are viable and feasible. And so infants and toddlers are definitely top of mind for that. Childcare deserts are top of mind for that. So thinking about where we feel called to support the market the most. And this really will be probably another 10-year plan. I mean, I wish it could be 5. I just don't. I don't know. I don't think it'll be shorter than, it will not be shorter than 5, but that's, I think, 10.
Okay. How about you, Leela?
Yeah, I think this is where it really depends on your state's political landscape. So also in Arizona, it just doesn't it doesn't make sense. We don't see big changes happen from one session to the next, generally speaking. That takes just a lot of political capital. It takes a lot of, alignment and focus. And there's many things that all of our states are working through now. So our approach for the next fiscal year is to really be able to provide what the investments of the ARPA and the relief funds have done for the system, and really show that it is most important to maintain the rates that we have, because of how it is the foundation to the rest of the system. If we were to have to roll rates back to pre-pandemic levels, I think we already have a supply issue of childcare. We would decimate that network. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to continue a lot of the additional quality investments that we had, but we are talking about, okay, what do we do to keep the train on the tracks? What do we do to keep families, able to maintain their living and, their family situation day to day? That's most critical. And then what can we do to really, again, over the next year, engage a larger variety of stakeholders, really be able to demonstrate the need and the benefits, and, hopefully have a larger ask in FY26, with a lot of support that's not coming from our agency. It's coming from communities. It's coming from the business community. It's coming from, families and parents. So that's kind of our goal is, again, there's been a lot of increase in people's understanding and awareness of childcare. It has been supported bipartisan at the congressional level. There's a lot of things going for it. And we just have to do more on engaging our communities, because I do think, and they are unique within Arizona. We can't just stay in Phoenix. We can't just go to Tucson. We really have to engage our rural communities. We have to be there. We have to, expand those networks. And so, yeah, again, we're just hoping to keep rates intact. We really feel like that's going to keep the system intact. We have a really resilient network of childcare providers. They know how to persevere through challenges. We feel like if we can maintain rates, we will figure out the other pieces.
Great. So let me open it up to any questions that the audience wants to pose. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And while you're doing that or thinking about that, Heather, I just want to see if there's any questions in the chat.
There are not, but while we're waiting for questions, I do have a question since I get the floor. My question is for both Leela and Ariel, and it is really, what recommendations, as you're using cost data, would you give to other lead agencies, other states and territories around using cost data?
I would say share it. You have to share it. Do not keep it in your internal files. So think about it. I'd say don't just send a link out to, hey, this report is posted, but really think through, what are we learning from this data? And don't be afraid to also share the challenges, because they're already experiencing it. This is nothing new to them. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
I think that's great advice. I would echo something that you've kind of talked about too, Leela, that was go into the communities that aren't convenient for you to go in, take that 2-day trip that's to the furthest place away. It has meant a lot when I've been able to go to providers in small communities that haven't had a lot of attention from the state, except for regulatory. So that's made a difference. And I think just being so North Carolina, I feel really, really, really proud. Our state has basically recovered as far as early childhood staffing from the pandemic. Is it the 15-year veteran teacher with degrees? Not necessarily, but we have the same number of teachers in classrooms. And I attribute that mostly to flexible funds that providers have had through ARPA and other stabilization efforts to pay teachers. So we're really looking at just kind of this business model that parents aren't going to be able to access childcare unless we have a different financing mechanism, unless we are able to have comparable wages to other industries. And when Sheetz is paying $19 an hour in a rural community, nobody's going to work at Mama Bear childcare provider if she can make $19 an hour at Sheetz. So I think that's like, think about how you can make the argument in your state in a way that will, resonate to the people you have to convince.
Thank you. Leela, there's a question here from Nina. Did you see it in the chat?
Yes, that is a great question. And I think this is the strength of our network of states and territories and tribes, because I think we all have this question: what can we do as a different approach to strengthen our family child care? One thing in Arizona we're doing is we have invested in business practices, coaching, and technical assistance, and tying it to automation. So childcare management software systems. So to Ariel's point again, why do we keep asking for data when we're already getting it? And part of it is because we're currently not getting data that says a lot for us. We only see CCDF subsidy. We don't see private pay, right? So there are all these different mechanisms. So I think we may have an opportunity to bring in our family child care providers, help them utilize the technology, the business practices training, and have more of a one-on-one approach than a survey that's just blanketed, or even more specific than bringing, hosting a couple of webinars for them. I think we do have to get into the community a little more. And we have communities that have a stronger network of family child care than others. So I think that would be the approach, and certainly open to hearing what other states are doing as well.
I think Georgia, and I don't know if there's anybody here on the call from Georgia, but Georgia was working for a while on gathering administrative data, I think, that would help them. And Heather, are you taking a look to see if anybody is from Georgia? Because I'd love to hear that. And I'll give you a minute, you Georgian folks, if you're on the call, to share that with us.
And if you're not, I'll find you at STAM.
Yeah, Woody Dover's spoken about it before. And so I will just give you a heads up that that might be worth looking into. So are there any other questions that people have? We have just a couple of minutes before we start to wrap up.
Hi, this is Junior Martin from Wisconsin. I have a question. Leila, I believe you had mentioned that in Arizona, you guys moved to a statewide rate. Did that cause any issues, like inflation issues for private pay parents that were in like a rural area that are maybe used to paying like a lower rate? Because I assume if the state raises the rates, providers who normally charge a lower rate would increase their prices. So any feedback on that?
That's a great question. So one policy change that we made, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, as we implemented our first round of rate increases, is we made sure that providers understood that we could reimburse them more than what they charge parents. And we did have to go through some iterations of educating providers on that. So I think we have, since that's been a year or so ago, I think we've kind of normalized this trend, which you're right, that we were seeing in the kind of our market rate survey as well, that the state subsidy rate was driving the price of care. So, we were able to make that change. And now, honestly, what we saw with moving to the statewide rate and as well as increasing to get closer to the cost of care is a huge increase in the number of quality childcare providers who have contracted with us to serve CCDF families. So I think it wasn't seen to a lot of childcare providers as advantageous to contract with us because the rates were so low. But now that they're higher, and they're like, okay, well, we're not going to be losing out on this. And what we've actually heard from one of our providers last month is one of their high quality childcare centers in an area where we don't generally say there's a need for CCDF families. He started with one CCDF enrolled child, and last month he had 10. So it's really creating access as well by making sure that we're really reimbursing closer to what it costs.
Great. Any follow-up, Junior? Are you good?
No follow-up. That was very insightful. Thank you.
Okay. So you both have been so wonderful. I'm so inspired. You're doing this with a smile on your face. And like I said, it just feels like it's Rubik's Cube to me. It just feels like you twist the box one way and you're working in your state, you're working with timelines that are different than your federal timelines, et cetera. And so I really feel honored that you chose to share this with everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Heather now to wrap it up, but best of luck to you both in the future. And again, thank you and applause from the audience.
Thank you, Jeannie, Leela, and Ariel. And thank you so much. It was very enjoyable to hear about your experiences, even the challenges, to know that, we're not alone in experiencing the challenges. So we're going to finish up with just sharing a little bit about resources that are available to CCDF lead agencies for free. Technical assistance is available and can be individualized for your specific needs. This slide gives some examples, such as serving as a thought partner, demonstrating how you can use the provider cost of quality calculator, or what you heard us refer to as the PCQC. We can help think through the best way to collect data and model data, how to develop a plan for engaging providers and partners, and consulting with you on how to engage a contractor. There's also intensive TA that is available, such as meeting regularly with you and your staff to go over the process of cost cost gathering, analyzing, and using data. And we can coordinate peer-to-peer conversations. So if there is a lead agency, a state or territory that has done something that is interesting to you and you would like to have a conversation with them in a more formal way, we can coordinate those conversations for you. And so actually, to go back, to access that TA, you can talk to your regional office or your state systems specialist to ask what's available to you. And even, sometimes it's just a question or I'm struggling with, and they can help direct you to the right technical assistance center and what level of TA that you need. And finally, I just want to highlight some things that are coming soon. So there will be a STAM session on cost data and working with decision makers on increasing subsidy rates, and one on subsidy policies and practices to increase childcare capacity. And our session 3 for this series will be on Tuesday, August 22nd from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that announcement should be coming out soon. So look for the subject for what we're going to concentrate on that session in the announcement. And finally, I want to thank everybody for joining us and remind you to please complete the evaluation. As you leave the Zoom meeting, you will receive a link to complete the evaluation, and that really helps us plan these sessions to be the most effective for you. So thank you.